In today's video, we're going to be talking, reviewing, and taking a closer look at all the Custodes subfaction, and then at the end of the video, we will be ranking them. I do want to mention quickly that I don't talk about martial katas in this video when I'm talking about the different subfactions. The reason for that being that even if you are playing, say, Emperor's Chosen and their preferred martial kata are Rendax, you might not take it because the opponent doesn't have any vehicle or monsters. There's a lot more going into which kata you pick, and I could talk about that if I did a single subfaction, but as you can probably tell, this video is a long one, so I decided to skip over that part and we can talk about that later. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll just get right into it. So let's just start with what is considered to be the best subfaction, and for a very good reason, the Emperor's Chosen. Now, the Emperor's Chosen is one of those factions where Games Workshop decided to give everything good to one of them, and then couldn't really figure out what to give everything else. I'm not sure that's true, but I still wonder why they do this. They did it with Leviathan for Tyranids. They've done it with Bloody Rose for the Sisters of Battle, and it just keeps happening. In any case, Emperor's Chosen, why are they so good? Well, their first trait is a reroll to hit or to wound for every unit whenever they activate. You see, this is good on everything, but it's really good on Custodes because they already hit on 2s. They don't have a lot of attacks, so getting those attacks through matters a lot. And if you do get lucky and don't get any 1s to hit, well, now you have a reroll when you're going to the wound phase. So the reroll is just really good in every single situation. There is no army build that you can make that wouldn't benefit from being Emperor's Chosen. That being said, you could choose another subfaction that might be better overall, but you can literally build any list, make it Emperor's Chosen, and it'll do just fine. The second trait they have is a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wound defense. In the current metagame, where mortal wounds are one of the best ways to deal damage, having a 4+ feel no pain against it is obviously very good. Custodes are already very weak to mortal wounds because you don't have a lot of models and you only save mortal wounds on 6s normally, so going to a 4+ instead of a 6+ is very good, and it helps you stay alive. That is the reason why Emperor's Chosen is taken as much as they are. If Games Workshop were to change the 4++ to basically anything else, you would probably see a lot more variation in the subfaction choices for Custodes, but at the same time you'd also see a lot less Custodes place in the top 8 of tournaments because they would just die to whatever mortal wounds list they run into. Now, while their traits are great, they also have an amazing stratagem even after it was nerfed. Esteemed Amalgam allows you to put any one unit into a different shield host for that turn. So that means that as you need it, you can become Dread Host, Solar Watch, Shadowkeepers. Whichever one you'd like to be for one turn, for 1 CP, you can put that unit into that shield host. Now, after the FAQ, you can only do this once per game. Even then, it is still super effective and very strong. One of the most common usages I have seen of this stratagem is to put something into Solar Watch, which allows the unit to fall back and charge. The Emperor Chosen Warlord trait is Auric Exemplar, and it's okay. It's not terrible by any means, but it's not amazing either. Basically, whenever you give your Warlord this Warlord trait, when he gets a kill, that means 1 model. After doing all of his attacks, for each model he killed, he'll get 1 bonus attack, up to a maximum of 4. Now, these attacks don't generate more attacks afterwards, but it does mean that a shield captain on bike, for example, will make 6 attacks with his lance, kill 2 or 3 models, and then make 2 or 3 more attacks. It's a very efficient way of taking care of some elite troops, or if you're in a matchup where you need to clear a lot of chaff units, it's also quite good. To round off Emperor's Chosen, we have quite frankly a bad relic, the Paragon Spear. This is instead of a Guardian Spear, and compared to your normal Guardian Spear, you get +1 strength in shooting and melee, and then +2 AP in combat. It's bad. There's no reason for you to spend 1 CP on this. And that was Emperor's Chosen, for many reasons. The best shield host in the current metagame. I personally think they are awfully boring to play. They're very vanilla, which is both good and bad. It is bad in the way that you can't really build a themed army about it, because everything you get from being Emperor's Chosen is just good on everything, which of course is the good thing about it, because you can literally put whatever units you like into an Emperor's Chosen army, and they'll get benefits that will be helpful to them in very general ways, which of course is just really good. Moving into my second favorite subfaction of the Custodes are the Shadowkeepers. Now, ironically, the Shadowkeepers' best matchup is actually probably against other Custodes. Their traits, Warlord trait and Relic, and even their stratagem is all really good into another Custodes player. So, what do the Shadowkeepers actually do? Well, their first trait is that they reduce the attack characteristic of anything they're in engagement range with by 1. So, if your Custodian Guards, which are Shadowkeepers, are fighting some other Custodian Guards, which are Emperor's Chosen, your Custodian Guards get 3 attacks each, while the Emperor's Chosen Custodian Guards only get 2 attacks each. Their second trait is that all units can reroll the wound roll against characters. Now, do you know what's very important for Custodes? It's character support, usually in the form of Trajan and a shield captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike. Rerolling wounds against those guys? Pretty nice. Guarantees some more damage, more or less. Now, those traits aren't quite as good as having a 4+ against mortal wounds or getting a free reroll against, well, everything, but they're still quite decent. And if the game ever becomes more focused on Hero Hammer, where a lot of armies have a lot of characters, then Shadowkeepers are gonna be a really good pick for you. The Shadowkeeper stratagem is called Grim Responsibility, and to make a very long text quite short, you reduce the strength of whatever attacks are hitting a specific unit for that phase by 1. This is especially good on your Dawn Eagle Jetbikes / Virtus Praetors, however you want to pronounce them, as they are toughness 6. That means that they want to use some medium heavy firepower into your bikes, such as strength 6, but with that stratagem, strength 6 now becomes strength 5, and they're wounding you on 5s instead of on 4s. In melee, let's say they're fighting regular Space Marines, well, they're strength 4, and -1 will take them to strength 3, which now means your toughness 6 is double their strength, and they're going to wound you on 6s instead of on 5s. This stratagem, of course, can also be useful on your infantry, but it is especially good on those bikes because of toughness 6. Do note that this stratagem cannot be used on vehicles, so it loses a bit of effect because it cannot be used on Dreadnoughts, which is in general very good for Custodes right now, but overall still a very strong stratagem. Now, the Warlord trait is Lock Warden, and I love this. It's very thematic and it's also very cool and powerful when you do get it off. This Warlord trait allows your Warlord to ignore the invulns of any characters that he is punching. Now, this would be really good if it was against everything, but being only against characters makes it slightly worse, but still very cool and very good. And remember that you're also re-rolling all wound rolls against characters because you are Shadowkeepers. So if you are fighting anything that has less than a 3-up armor save and you're hitting them with your AP 3, well, oh boy, they don't get to save that very well. And whatever you are punching is most likely going to die. Finally, we have the Shadowkeeper's Relic, which is the Stasis Obli. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. Oblet? I'm not sure. In any case, you give Fight Last to something you're engagement range with. Yeah, that's it. It's very simple, but Fight Last is also a very powerful effect. And if you combo this with a character that also has the Lock Warden trait, then all of a sudden, if you get into combat with an opposing player's character, they are Fight Last, they don't get invulns, and you have full wound rerolls against that target. Of course, this also makes your character less likely to be charged, because if something does charge it, well, it's just gonna get fight lasted and they'll get to punch after you get to punch them. Overall, Shadowkeepers are a very good sub-faction that is just on few things, and because the metagame being the way it is, slightly behind Emperor's Chosen, and therefore not as popular a choice. Our third sub-faction is my favorite personally. It is the Dreadhost. This is meant to be the killer sub-faction, so to speak. They go in, they beat shit up, and then they keep on moving. The first trait they get as Dreadhost is that attacks within 9 inches gain an extra point of AP. That means that every melee attack is +1 AP, and every shooting attack within 9 inches is also +1 AP. This is in general just fairly decent. It mostly means that you ignore AOC, so to speak, because Armor of Contempt obviously gives their target reduce AP by 1, and then you get +1 AP. So in total, it means you ignore it. Against factions that don't have Armor of Contempt, it's not as great, mostly because factions that don't have Armor of Contempt usually have a 5-up invuln, or a 6-up invuln, or even a 4-up invuln. But in the cases where it does matter, it's pretty nice. However, because you have to be within 9 inches to get that bonus AP, that also means that if you come out of Deep Strike, you don't get the bonus AP, which is a little bit silly if you ask me. I don't think anyone would be breaking the game by making this sub-faction trait within 10 inches instead, but oh well. Their second trait is that every unit in the Dreadhost army are allowed to reroll their charge rolls. This is one of those traits that on paper is just always great. It means that whenever you fail a charge, you can just try and go for it again. But it can also have the reverse effect of making you believe that because you have a reroll, you can simply make those longer charges. Keep in mind that even with rerolls, to get a 9-inch charge, you're looking at like a 52% chance. So even with rerolls, it's a 50-50 between making a charge if you're coming out of Deep Strike. So while I do agree that it's a good trait and I would more than likely take it whenever I could, if it was like an upgrade, it's still not something that you can totally rely on. It just helps. For the Dread Host stratagem, we have the Golden Light of the Moiratus. Moiratus? I don't know how to pronounce this either. In any case, when a unit comes in from Deep Strike, you can spend 2 CP, and your opponent can no longer overwatch against that target, and the unit also has -1 to be hit by all attacks until the start of your next command phase. This is a great stratagem if it didn't cost 2 CP. These are good effects that you want on something that comes in from Deep Strike in certain matches. However, and I do not know why, unlike Transhuman and a lot of other stratagems in the Custodes Codex, this one costs 2 CP flat instead of having the usual, if the unit contains 3 models or less, it's 1 CP, and if it's more than 3 models, then it's 2 CP, and I don't know why. Maybe because it would be too good on Dreadnoughts Deep Striking, but on the other hand, then you could just say that if it's 3 or more models or a vehicle, then it would be 2 CP. I don't know. I think the stratagem should get a buff and be changed to be like Transhuman, where it's, as I said, 3 models or less, 1 CP, 4 models or more, 2 CP, and then if you need to add in, if it's a vehicle, this stratagem also costs 2 CP. That's just my opinion. Decent stratagem, too costly. The Warlord trait, however, is where I get really excited whenever I play Dreadhost, All-Seeing Annihilator. The Warlord with this trait can choose himself or a core unit within 6 inches, and that unit gets exploding 6s, also known as if you roll a hit roll of 6, it counts as 2 hits. In an army like Custodes, where we don't get a lot of attacks, but what we have is quite quality, this is really damn strong. It is one of the best reasons to play Dreadhost, and it's just a really fun warlord trait and quite powerful. Finally, we have their relic, the Admon Mortis. This is a Castellan axe with +1 AP and +1 damage, as well as +1 strength in shooting. This is actually a great relic for the pure reason that it's damage 3 in melee, which is very rare for Custodes. Most of our stuff is damage 2, so having another source of damage 3 is very nice. Unfortunately, it's a Castellan axe, which can only be taken by the Shield Captain on foot, or the Shield Captain in Terminator armor, or the Vexillus Praetor. Out of those 3 options, only the Terminator Captain is slightly viable, and he's not a great choice, just an okay choice. So while the relic is quite good, it doesn't really have any good users, and therefore kinda falls to the wayside. As I said at the beginning, Dreadhost is my favorite faction. Unfortunately, they do fall off quite a bit when looking at it in a competitive sense. That being said, I believe they are one of the better sub-factions to pick for casual play, as you get a lot of fun tools without them being too oppressive for your opponent. But yeah, in competitive play, the tools that they get access to as Dreadhost are just not good enough to say no to either -1 attack as Shadowkeepers or a 4-up against mortals as the Emperor's Chosen. However, they will remain my favorite sub-faction because they're cool and they're fun, and I hope some of you guys will try them out if you haven't already. The Aquilan Shield is the lore sub-faction if you want to play Custodes and feel like a total badass while not really playing like a badass. If you don't know, the Aquilan Shield are kinda like the secret bodyguards of the Imperium. By secret bodyguards, I mean that they show up and protect individuals without giving a reason, because they've been told or have a vision from the Emperor that this person will be important to the Imperium. However, they don't tell this to anyone, so all of a sudden a lonely Cadian guardsman is surrounded by 3 giant Custodes, and they're protecting him, and while that's nice, he have no clue what the fuck's going on. Anyway, that's for a lore video, not for this sub-faction review. Coming into the Aquilan Shield, their first trait is that every unit will gain heroic intervention, which is nice. I mean, heroic interventions built in is just nice. It's something your opponent has to play around, but we already have a stratagem for 1 CP to give any 1 unit heroic interventions, and being quite quite honest, it's not that often that you'd need more than one heroic intervention on a unit that doesn't have it. So while it's nice it's built in so you can save the CP, it's not like a huge upside. Their second trait is that they ignore AP1, which is, I mean, wow, they released Armor of Contempt for like 5 different factions, but they couldn't even give it as a sub-faction bonus to Custodes? I don't have much to say on this, it's just bad. There's barely any AP1 in the game, so yeah, it's just bad. Their stratagem is called Shield of Honor, and it gives them the bodyguard rule, more or less, for 1 CP when protecting an Imperium character. That means that you can also use it on an Inquisitor or any other HQ Imperium character that you put into your army. The issue with this is that you usually don't want to put any other characters into your army that isn't already a Custodian, and since Custodes counts as 2 for Lookout Sir when shielding Custodian units anyway, this stratagem feels kinda useless. The only place where it matters is if you only have 1 model left in a unit, at which point they can probably just kill that unit and then shoot your character anyway. So yeah, it's a bad stratagem. Their Warlord trait is called Revered Companion, and it halves any damage that a Warlord takes while having this trait, and that's pretty nice. I mean, half damage does matter. Most damage in the game is multi-damage, so halving off of that's pretty good. That being said, the only units in the game that we have that can truly be somewhat of a tank that is a character is the Shield Captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike, and he's in every list. And I mean, if you play Aquilan Shield, I guess it's nice to have this, but once again, we fall in the wayside of why would I play Aquilan Shield when I could just play something else and probably do better. Unless you think they're cool. If you think they're cool, you should obviously play them. In terms of the stratagem, Warlord trait, and traits, they're bad. They're real bad. And unfortunately, the relic isn't much better either. If you are equipped with this relic, which you can only be if you have a Presidium shield, you're also -1 to hit in melee. Guys, did you know that there are only 2 models in the game that can take the Presidium shield? That being the Shield Captain on foot and the Vexilla, which are characters, meaning that they're character protected, and that you're probably placing them in a way where there's a lot of things to say here. My point being, -1 to hit is good. -1 to hit when you have a certain piece of equipment on, especially when that piece of equipment is limited to only 2 different models. It's overall, it's bad. It's bad. I hate to say it because the Aquilan Shield is really cool in the lore, but in the game, they are nothing but a fluff faction. Second to last are the Solar Watch. Some of the very coolest Custodes models you'll see are painted in the Solar Watch paint scheme, but oh boy are they a pain, and I do not recommend it unless you know how to paint white. Anyways, the Solar Watch are the go fast sub-faction because they get +1 to advances and charge rolls, as well as +1 if you have the Impeccable Vanguard ability, which I believe is only on bikes, but in any case, you get +1 to those advances. Your second trait is that you get to fall back and charge, and if you are using bikes, kinda like you're supposed to a Solar Watch, this is a chef kiss ability to have. As I mentioned during the Emperor's Chosen part, where I talked about the esteemed Amalgam stratagem that allows you to put a unit in a different sub-faction, most of the time you'll put something into Solar Watch to get this ability of falling back and charging, and often, if you've brought them, it will be bikes. Because falling back 14 inches and potentially charging a completely different target than what you are engaged with is very, very good. Unfortunately, that's about where it stops being great for the Solar Watch, and as we move into the stratagem, Warlord trait, and relic, we'll see they're kinda mid, if not worse than that. The stratagem is called the Eagle Strike, and when you destroy the enemy Warlord, you can pay 1 CP, and the enemy gets -1 to combat attrition tests. Which, if you've played Warhammer in the last, I don't know, year, will literally never matter. But I mean, I guess it's fine. It's very niche, as I've written here in the text. It's perhaps the most niche stratagem in the entire Custodes Codex, because sometimes you'll be against a faction that ignores it, like all the Space Marines, and a lot of the time you'll just be against a faction where they don't have enough small chaff units in sizes of 10, 12 or more where it'll matter. Oh, and you also have to kill the Warlord, which I mean does happen often in games, but it's not exactly something that happens early on. And at that point, it's kind of just a win more situation, but it's very, very niche, very situational, not that good. The Warlord trait is called Sally Forth, and at the start of your charge phase, you can select one Solar Watch infantry unit within 6 inches of the Warlord. Until the end of that phase, that unit can charge even if it advanced. Now, the cool thing about this Warlord's trait is that you give it in the charge phase and not in the command phase. The not so cool part about this is that it's only on Solar Watch infantry, which I just find a little bit odd. Would it really be too broken to have bikes that can advance and charge? I mean, it's only one unit. I feel like you see plenty of other faction that can move upwards of 15, 16 inches and still charge. It might be too broken, but I mean, then change it to the command phase to make it a bit harder and you have to position yourself for it. I'm not so sure about this. I feel like a solid buff to this that wouldn't break it would simply be select one friendly Solar Watch core unit within 6 inches. And then if you need to, change it from the charge phase to the command phase. Finally, we have the Relic, which is the Swift Silver Talon. A Solar Watch model with this Relic Guardian Spear can shoot and charge in a turn it fell back. The spear itself is the exact same profile as a normal Guardian Spear, with the exception of getting +1 AP in both shooting and melee. I don't really know why it says the bearer can shoot and charge in a turn in which it fell back, because Solar Watch already have built-in fallback and charge. Maybe they just forgot about that? I'm not sure. In any case, this relic is a solid, well, why would you take this when you have other things to spend CP on? The Solar Watch, a decent sub-faction to pick, a super cool paint scheme if you are great at painting white. When it comes to play, they could do better. They are not the greatest among the Custodian sub-factions. Again, another great choice for perhaps casual games, as what you get can be fun, but are in no way like a game-breaking thing or making you overpowered in any way. And the last sub-faction we need to talk about are the Emisarries Imperiatus, which is just a genius name. I'm not sure who came up with it, but claps to them. That's a very cool name. And actually, it's a bit of a faction I feel like might be a sleeper choice. They are the new kids on the block. They were added in 9th edition for the Custodes. They have Army White Fight First, which is, not really surprisingly, a very strong effect, especially when every unit you have is gonna be at least strength 5 in melee. They also get to ignore all hit and wound roll modifiers, which, depending on what you're fighting in your local meta or what is popular during, you know, whatever time we're in, can be extremely powerful. Alright, so the traits are good. How about their stratagem? Their stratagem is called Into the Darkness, and it's a pre-game stratagem allowing you to make a normal move before the game starts. If that unit contains 4 or more models, the stratagem costs 3 command points, otherwise it costs 2 command points. Pre-game moves for Custodes can be a very, very powerful thing, as you can get somewhat slow units up the board even faster, and that is in general what Custodes want to do, no matter what kind of army list you play. You want to move up the board, get into combat, and then hopefully your superior stats can win you the battle, assuming you choose the right engagement. And yeah, as I said, the pre-game move can be very powerful, but it's also very expensive, coming in at 2 CP or 3 CP, depending on what you're moving. Situational for sure. The hard part about this right now is that in Nephilim, you only start with 6 CP, so to even have the option of using this, you need to have 2 CP after your list has been built, which means you'll probably have to give up on some relics or warlord traits, which of course can hurt a lot for Custodes, because they are quite dependent on those characters being as tough and as good and as powerful as humanly possible. Their warlord trait is Voice of the Emperor. This warlord trait will add 3 inches to whatever aura abilities you have to a maximum of 12 inches, and also give you the aura called Voice of the Emperor, which gives you +1 leadership for Custodes and Sisters of Silence within 9 inches. Hey, if leadership 11 isn't good enough, you can now have leadership 12. Getting +3 inches is honestly probably good enough for the warlord trait itself. I just find it a bit funny that they decided that the aura effect that you also get on top is +1 leadership, because I don't know, I haven't been in a game where my leadership have mattered yet, but I mean, it's there. Their relic is Halo of the Torchbearer. While a friendly, the Halo of the Torchbearer gives you a 3-inch aura, which lets any Emisarries Imperiatus units ignore any or all modifiers to its move, advance, and charge rolls. Additionally, at the start of the fight phase, you roll 1d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches of this model. On a 3+, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound or d3 mortal wounds if that unit's leadership characteristic is 7 or less. I don't think you ever take this relic unless you're playing against a faction which gives you constant minuses to move, and even then you have to be within 3 inches of whatever warlord has this relic. The mortal wounds in the fight phase is really not that big. A 3+ to deal 1 mortal wound, because most things in the game have leadership like 8, 9, 10. I just don't see this relic doing much for you, but if I'm completely wrong, please go ahead and tell me in the comments below. Emisarries Imperiatus are one of the factions that I have very little experience playing with or against, so perhaps there's some tricks that I'm not thinking about that you can do with this relic. That being said, it gets an overall rating of I don't think you'd bother spending the CP on it. So, Emisarries Imperiatus. As I was saying, depending on where the meta is, I do believe that this could perhaps become a top pick for subfaction. However, as the game is right now, you're still very focused on the defensive stuff you can get from the Emperor's Chosen subfaction. So it's still sitting there somewhere in the middle where it's a fine choice, but you probably would be better off playing Emperor's Chosen. Alright, we have talked, analyzed, and looked at every single Custodes subfaction, so now it is time to rank them. We're gonna start at the bottom and work our way up. The number 6 shield host will be the Aquilan Shield. You could probably tell from the way I talked about them and how shortly I talked about them when talking about the subfactions that they really don't have anything going for them other than giving every unit heroic interventions. Ignoring AP1 does literally nothing. Their stratagem doesn't really work most of the time because they already give Lookout Sir with just 2 models. And Custodes just don't really benefit from being Aquilan Shield overall, therefore they are placed as number 6. Now for number 5, it's a bit of a controversial opinion, and maybe it's because I like number 4 better than I like number 5, but I've decided to put Solar Watch as number 5. While getting +1 to advance and charge rolls are really good, and falling back and charging is extremely good, the rest of what you get for being Solar Watch is just not as good. Their relic doesn't really do anything, their stratagem doesn't really do anything, their warlord trait is limited to infantry only, and Custodes aren't really big on killy infantry. And that is why I've decided to put Solar Watch as number 5, but I would argue that you could also swap them with number 4, which are the Dread Host. Now, I could be somewhat unconsciously placing Dread Host over Solar Watch because they are my favorite sub-faction. That being said, I feel like if you picked between Dread Host and Solar Watch, I think you would gain more from having the 1 bonus AP and reroll charges army-wide, as well as exploding 6s with the Warlord trait, than you would find general purpose for playing Solar Watch. When comparing their traits, I do kind of want to give Solar Watch the advantage, but Dread Host has a better relic, a better Warlord trait, and a better stratagem, even though the stratagem isn't amazing for Dread Host either, which is why I've decided to put them in 4th place. Coming in third are the Emisarries Imperiatus. As I've just briefly explained not too long ago, I think these are a sleeper pick that are just waiting for the meta to change slightly. And by slightly, I mean we need to get rid of all these mortal wounds, or somehow make Custodes even tougher, which I don't think would be healthy for the game. In any case, ignoring all hit and wound modifiers, as well as fight first on all these elite models are extremely good. The pre-game move, while expensive, is also very powerful, but they do of course fall off a bit when you look at the Warlord trait and relic. That being said, Custodes still have some really good relics and Warlord traits from the general codex that you can use instead of your faction-specific ones. Emisarries Imperiatus are just waiting for their chance to shine in the sun, and I'm sure it'll come at some point, which is why I've placed them at the 3rd place spot. At this point, the rest of the ranking shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but Shadowkeepers come in at number 2. Where Emisarries Imperiatus are just waiting for mortal wounds or defensive to become better, Shadowkeepers already, well, they're great. The only weakness they have compared to the number 1 spot is that they don't have the defense against mortal wounds. -1 attack while in engagement range is amazing. Rerolling wounds against characters are great. Their stratagem is a bit reliant on what you're facing, but reducing something from strength 6 down to strength 5 when they're shooting or attacking against your bikes is also great. The Warlord trait to ignore invulns against characters is awesome, and their relic to give fight last is also amazing. Shadowkeepers are by far, except for the number 1 spot, your best pick when it comes to a sub-faction when you're playing Custodes. And number 1 is of course Emperor's Chosen. There really is not a lot to say here. Rerolling a hit roll or a wound roll with every unit whenever they activate is awesome. Getting a 4+ against mortals is kinda mandatory to play Custodes in the current metagame. And their stratagem lets them become any of the previous mentioned sub-factions for 1 turn. If you need that 1 extra AP in combat, make them Dread Host for that 1 turn. If you need to fall back and shoot, make them Solar Watch. If you need Fight First to make your opponent think about what they're doing, make them Emisarries Imperiatus. There are just no limits to how flexible Emperor's Chosen is and how great they fit with the current metagame for Custodes. It is unfortunately the truth. I wish it wasn't so. But here we are for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video looking at the sub-factions. There is a lot more to say about certain sub-factions, and if you want an in-depth video on any one of them, please let me know. That way I can talk a bit more about how you can use your stratagems and your abilities when you're actually playing the game. But this video is already 30 minutes long, so I figured we'd stick with this short summary of the different ones, and then we could make some more videos after that if need be. So let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in that. My name has been Rejnols. Thank you so much for watching, and until I see you again, I hope you have a wonderful time.